Here is Brighty of the Grand Canyon. We're now at the next chapter, which is the sheriff learns a lesson. Here's the picture. There's the picture. All that night, the two men hunted in the dark recesses of the canyon, but there was no trace of the killer. At daybreak, the sheriff came upon a collapsible canvas boat hidden under a cliff. "I like to be quick reporting a crime," he explained to Uncle Jim as he pulled out the bulky bundle. "We can scoot across the river in this, top it out the south rim, and be in the state's attorney's office before dark. He'll round up a whole posse to help us. Now, Jim, some way we got to get Brighty across the river so we can take turns riding him up the wall. Hiking down is one thing, hiking up is another." Tired after the long night, Uncle Jim was searching Brighty for ticks, not because a few less would make any difference, but because he mourned Old Timer, and there was a measure of comfort in doing something for his creature. The sheriff sputtered as he began untwisting the ends of the bailing wire wrapped around the boat. "Whoever used this last sure tied it up tight against the rats. Wish that burro would pick this with his big yellow teeth, instead of just standing there grinning and getting his tick squeezed." Uncle Jim came to help, but the sheriff waved him away. "You forget I'm a canyon man too," he said testily, "and I'm a sight younger than you." Once he had the wire off, he demonstrated his strength by opening up the small boat as if it were an umbrella. Inside were a pair of oars and a roll of wire and 2 life preservers. "Here," Uncle Jim offered. "I'll help carry it to the river." The 2 men scrambled down the rocks to the water's edge, carrying the boat over their heads. Uncle Jim raised his voice above the river's roar. "She'll ship water unless you soak her first." "Delays," the sheriff fretted. "Always delays. Should be up to Flagstaff now." He yanked off his boots and socks and rolled his trousers to his knees. He pushed the boat into the water, tilted it to let the waves slosh inside and out. Meanwhile, Uncle Jim inflated the life preservers, and Brighty stood sleepy-eyed, watching the river lick at the boat with its muddy tongue. A tattered puff of smoke blew across his face from Uncle Jim's pipe. "You'd get across faster if you swang over on that cage, Sheriff," Uncle Jim said. With the stem of his pipe, he pointed to a wooden cage hanging from a single cable strung across the river. "Not me," shouted the sheriff. "I get dizzy in a little old tree hammock in my own yard, let alone riding a swaying cage over the river." He wedged the boat between 2 boulders and cupped his hands to his mouth to make sure he could be heard. "And I ain't taking no chances on losing you neither. You know Old Timer's sister, and you're coming along so you can corroborate my story." Uncle Jim cupped his hands too. "I can't. Teddy Roosevelt's coming to hunt lion, and I'm heading up the north rim. Got to work my hounds." "You was heading that way," the sheriff yelled. "I'll see someone drives you around the rim to your cabin tomorrow, first thing." Brighty tired of the talk and started to walk away. "Stop him!" the sheriff bellowed. "Stop him!" Uncle Jim called out, "Brighty!" just this one time, and the shaggy head came around. He waited for Uncle Jim to catch up to him. The sheriff came running too, panic in his face. "Jim, we got to have him for the trip up. We got to. Time's the thing." The corners of Uncle Jim's mustache turned up. "Brighty don't want to go." "Oh," the sheriff mimicked. "He don't he?" Uncle Jim, what a funny conversation. Uncle Jim shook his head. "He ain't never crossed this mad river, and ain't likely he'll take that notion now." "Then how come he wets his feet in Bright Angel Creek a dozen times a day and won't cross the river even once?" "Because he's smarter than folks, that's why. Besides, he's a free spirit. No man can herd him around." "Oh, you reckon not? Well, I say he's going across, see? No little old burro's going to fox me." Brighty scratched his neck with his hind hoof, looking absently from one man to the other. "Here's how we'll do it." The sheriff faced round to see if the boat was getting wet. Then he barked out his directions. "Me and you'll row across, then you snub that wire around a tree on the other side. Whilst you're snubbing the wire, I'll row back with the tag in and tie it on Brighty." The sheriff rubbed his nose, proud of his plan. "And then I'll push him into the river, and you can pull on the wire and drag him across." "It's a plumb silly idea, Sheriff. He ain't a-going out to like it. So he see how his feet's planted in the sand? He spoke his mind already." Blasted Jim, tain't that what he likes. Remember, I'm the law, and I'm telling you to hobble him so he can't blow before I get back." Uncle Jim reluctantly did as he was told. He took off his handkerchief and twirled it around, twirled it until it was no thicker than a cord of twine. He led Brighty to a little place where he could browse. Then he tied the burro's feet just above the fetlocks, half hoping he would kick and refuse to be hobbled. But Brighty stood calm and unruffled, even as the two men walked away and got in the boat and put out for the opposite shore. The river was 400 feet wide at this point and swift in spite of the silt it carried. Brighty stared after the boat, watching it bob up and down in the brown foam, watching the head for boulders, then suddenly whirl around and miss them. A lone, desolate feeling came into him as he watched. He was glad when the ring-tailed cat and her train of kittens came rubbing against his legs. He nosed them, sneezing into their fur. A butterfly flew over his head, taunting him with her freedom. He scared her away with his ears and began eating the burro brush, still looking on as the boat reached the swift center of the river and then the quieter waters on the far side. No sooner did it touch the opposite shore and discharge a passenger than it swung about for the return trip. Somehow Brighty seemed to know that it was coming back to seize him, yet he did not fight his hobbles nor try to break loose. He stared with a solemn, unblinking eyes as if his mind were hobbled too. He tore off more brush, but only held it to his mouth, his eyes watchful, expectant. The boat rose and fell with the waves, now half lost in foam, then now in full view. On leaping water, it was coming to get him. Now the sheriff stood up in the boat, pulled it in the shore, pulled it up on the sand. He was coming toward Brighty, dragging a wire behind him, dragging it over his shoulders. Now he was half running, a noose of rope in one hand and the tag end of the wire pointing sharp at Brighty. And still Brighty made no move. Not until the sheriff was close on him, so close he could hear him pant and see the shine in his eyes. Not until then did Brighty move so much as an eyelash. Then, with a high snort that was almost a laugh, he leaped into the air, bounding on his hobbles like a rabbit, bounding up over boulders and through brush until the knot in the handkerchief loosened and he was free. "Come back!" the sheriff's voice screeched. "Come back, you tarnal—" He stumbled up and down, clawing the air. He stamped up and down, clawing the air. But Brighty was a freedom-bound, climbing up, and wild feeling inside him, and far away on the opposite shore, a spry-legged figure cheered him on. Here's the next one. It's called A Free Spirit. See it? That must be the sheriff way down there. Brighty was in a kind of glory. Released from his fear of the mad, sucking river, he climbed, flying. Each deep-drawn breath filled him with a pleasure so piercing he did a light-hearted buck up over his liberty. He noticed afresh the joys of his world, the mesquite shrubs dangling their sugary pods, the sweet pungence of sage, a water ouzel diving into the spray of the bright Angel Creek. "I'm free!" His hooves beat time as he ascended. "I'm free, free, free!" A hawk came swooping low over his head to snatch a plump Chickawalla lizard. But just in time, the lizard spied him, scurried from the nearest crevice, slid in, and blew himself up to fit. The hawk wheeling, soaring against the reds and blues of the walls until he was lost in the distance. For days, Brighty savored his liberty. He had for company all the small creatures that scampered around among the rocks and all the birds that sailed the sky. And then one twilight, as he was loafing along his trail, something in the wind brought his head up. Mule smell. Camp smell. His laziness was gone. He threw out his jaws and let out a whistling bray. To his delight, the echoes were not alone in their answer. Mixed in with them were answering brays. He ran, leaping in their direction, and suddenly, around an elbow in the trail, he came full upon the scene. 2 mules hobbled and 2 men building a fire. One of the men, squat and red-bearded, was eating a cracker with one hand and feeding the fire with the other. For an instant they all regarded each other, and then Brighty was snuffing noses with the mules, and the mules were dancing in their hobbles. The bearded man came slowly toward Brighty, offering what was left of the cracker. Brighty took a long whiff, and unable to resist this familiar smell, began lipping the crumbs from the man's hands. "Look, Joe," the red-bearded man laughed. "Tame as a dog. We can just use him to pack our cameras and stuff." "Sure thing," Joe answered. "Our mules have been overloaded. I've known it ever since we left Jacob's Lake." The red-bearded man could scarcely contain his glee. "This little gray mouse has walked wham into a trap. He's going to work." The men laughed loud and long over their good luck. "Now we won't have to unpack the mules every time the trail gets narrow," one said. He can share the load. Great Scott, but he's husky. Bet he could carry 200 pounds without batting an eyelash, said the other. Brighty had a good supper of crackers and beans, and because he was glad to spend the night in company, he let himself be hobbled close to the mules. In the morning he was all meekness while the men loaded a pack on his back, but when it was strapped in place he changed his mind about carrying it. The weight was all wrong, entirely too much on one side, and the belly band pinched horribly. It was not only too tight, but much too close to his forelegs. In his dumb way he tried to explain all this by refusing to budge a step. He just stood, stupid-eyed and sleepy, his feet grounded to the earth like lightning rods. But the men did not understand. They sweat and swore at his stubbornness, not seeing it was due to their own bungling. They broke off a willow whip and lashed it across his rump. Then fierceness grew in Brighty, and the quick thought of freedom flashed through his brain. He reared into action, and before the men could grab him, ran to the babbling comfort of bright Angel Creek. Then he stood in his coolness, ears waving defiance. What if I were to roll now? They seemed to ask. Without waiting for an answer, he bucked his knees and plumped over on his side in the water. Something in the pack cracked. Yipes, the red-bearded man howled. My camera! He plunged into the creek after Blighty. You stumble bum, he yelled, jerking Brighty to his feet and whacking him with a stick. You catch up to the mules now and mind your ways. Brighty not only caught up with the mules, he passed them. Then he went flying up the gravelly trail. Never was he more sure-footed, in and out of the creek, leaping over boulders, over little cataracts, and with every leap his belly band loosened to greater comfort. He could hear the red-bearded man bellowing after him, and then a lasso came wanging through the air with a corkscrew twist of his neck. Brighty lowered his head just in time to see the rope whirl beyond and tighten around a bulge of rock. He hadn't had so much fun in days and days. Another leap and another, and now he stood on a ledge looking down on the man. Suddenly, he let out all his wind, and with a wriggling motion of his body, slid the pack forward, down his neck to the rock on which he stood. Then daintily he stepped out of the ropes and kicked the pack, sending it rolling and tumbling downward until it caught in a juniper bush. Loud cries echoed up from the men and into the quivering silence that followed. Brighty sent a great raucous hee-haw. What a great chapter. That was great. That's it for today. Bye.